All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to this Exam Prep Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that's absolutely crucial for your Nutanix NCP-MCI 7.5 certification. Ncp-Mci 7.5, 12.5 cclm, and Od-Cclm. That stands for Cross-Cluster Live Migration and On-Demand Cross-Cluster Live Migration. Look, if you're an infrastructure admin gearing up for this exam, you already know that moving workloads seamlessly across environments is basically the holy grail of modern IT, right? But the exam isn't just going to ask if you know how to click a migrate button. They are going to test you on the strict prerequisites, the exact version numbers, and those really subtle limitations that govern these features in a baseline AOS 7.5, AHV 11.0, and Prism Central 7.5 environment. So grab your notebooks, get focused, because we are going to break this whole thing down.
Here is our game plan for today. First, why live migration matters. Second, a walkthrough with real-world examples. Third, common exam traps. And finally, the key facts to memorize.
Let's jump straight into Section 1, Why Live Migration Matters. So at its core, live migration is all about one thing: preserving uptime. Whether you're dealing with planned maintenance, letting Acropolis Dynamics scheduling balance the load, or running an AHV hypervisor upgrade, you have to move a running guest virtual machine from one place to another without the application or the end user ever noticing. We are talking about true zero downtime. Now, intra-cluster migration, moving a VM from one host to another within the exact same cluster, that's standard stuff. But what happens when you need to jump the boundary of the cluster entirely? Well, that is exactly where cross-cluster live migration steps in. And here is your very first major conceptual split for the exam, understanding the difference between standard CCLM and Od-Cclm. Standard cross-cluster live migration is strictly tied to disaster recovery. It requires your VMs to be protected with a synchronous replication schedule, meaning a 0-second recovery point objective. It's built for planned failovers. But what if you just need to move a VM to another cluster right this second, without setting up all those complex DR protection policies first? That is where on-demand CCLM really shines. It's ad hoc, it's flexible, and it lets you migrate VMs across AHV clusters spanning multiple availability zones, or AZs. The reason Od-Cclm is such a game changer is that it doesn't just move the VM's compute and storage. It takes the metadata with it across AHV clusters registered to Prism Central. That means crucial things like your VM categories, which, as we know, drive your security policies and automation, travel right alongside the VM. But there's a huge catch to this metadata movement that you need to know for the test, and we'll get to that in just a second. All right, moving into Section 2, Walkthrough and Real-World Examples. Let's visualize this. Say you need to evacuate an entire AHV cluster for a major physical maintenance event, and you're using Od-Cclm to move a standard VM. First off, the VM actually has to be powered on. In fact, Prism Central will literally filter out powered-off VMs for this specific operation. So you select your VM, kick off the migration to the target AHV cluster, and the system dynamically allocates network bandwidth to multiple data streams to guarantee a blazing fast, zero-downtime transfer. The VM lands on the new cluster, and your app just keeps humming along uninterrupted. But here is the underlying why, and that massive caveat I mentioned. You absolutely must understand this. Remember how I said VM categories travel with the VM? Well, if you are migrating across different Prism Central instances, those VM categories are only preserved if those exact identical categories already exist on the target Prism Central instance beforehand. If the category doesn't exist on the destination side, it just gets dropped during the migration. Gone. For an infrastructure admin, that means your automation or flow security policies could completely break if you haven't prepped the target environment. The exam will definitely try to trip you up on this prerequisite. Let's look at a slightly trickier scenario: migrating a highly secure VM utilizing a Virtual Trusted Platform module, or vTPM. Doing this introduces some very strict prerequisites. First up, the VM has to have UEFI firmware and Secure Boot enabled, no exceptions. Second, to securely replicate that vTPM configuration across the clusters, you absolutely have to ensure the secure gRPC port, which handles the Google Remote Procedure Call protocol, is open between the environments. If that port is blocked, your secure config can't transfer and the migration fails right there. And beyond the network ports, there's a strict software version requirement too. Honestly, this matrix right here, absolute gold for your exam prep.
Test writers love verifying that you know these distinct version requirements for advanced features. So standard Od-Cclm, that needs AOS 6.7 and Prism Central version 2023.3. But if you want to move that vTPM-enabled VM we just talked about, you've got to be running at least AOS 6.8 and PC 2024.1. Furthermore, if your compute clusters are hooked up to external storage, that requirement bumps up again to AOS and PC version 7.5.1. Seriously, don't gloss over these numbers. They are classic distractors used in multiple choice questions.
Okay, Section 3, Common Exam Traps. Let's expose where things go wrong. Here is a classic networking trap. On-demand CLM is strictly supported over IPAM-enabled VPC, or virtual private cloud, overlay networks. It is explicitly not supported on IPAM-enabled VLANs. Why? Well, VPC overlays abstract the underlying physical network, right? This allows the VM's IP address and network identity to seamlessly float across different physical clusters and AZs. Traditional VLANs just don't natively offer that kind of magic cross-cluster IP mobility in this context, so Od-Cclm just flat out blocks it. You also need to know the strict boundaries on where you can actually migrate. Specifically, Od-Cclm to Nutanix Cloud Clusters NC2 on Azure is a no-go, not supported. Furthermore, on-demand live migration to clusters on Nutanix Cloud AZ, which is the DRaaS offering, is also unsupported. So if an exam question asks you to architect an ad hoc live migration to Azure using Od-Cclm, you've got to recognize that immediately as an invalid design.
Memorize this specific failure list right here. Your Od-Cclm migration is going to fail instantly if the guest VM is part of a consistency group, if it has volume groups attached, if its storage is sitting at replication factor 1, or if it's tied to a flow network security policy. Oh, and if GPU pass-through is enabled, instant failure. And that makes total sense when you think about it. GPU pass-through literally hard tethers the VM to a specific physical hardware component on that exact host. You can't live migrate a physical dependency across a cluster boundary.
Now, do not overlook the storage container rule. It's a subtle but critical configuration detail. Both the source and the destination clusters must have identically named storage containers for the guest VMs. So if your VM is sitting in a container named self-service container on the primary site, your target cluster better have a container named exactly self-service container. It's an absolute mandatory requirement for DR-based sync replication, and frankly, it applies as a best practice constraint across the board to ensure storage transparency. Another sneaky trap is around RBAC, or role-based access control. If you're moving a VM between two clusters registered to the exact same Prism Central instance, standard administrative permissions apply perfectly fine. But if you're trying to perform an on-demand live migration between clusters registered to different Prism Central deployments, only the administrator, specifically the local admin user account in Prism Central, has the authority to pull off that cross-PC migration. 60. I want you to burn this number into your brain. This specific number represents the absolute maximum limit of guest VMs you can live migrate in parallel using Od-Cclm. Now, sure, technically there's no hard limit to the total number of migrations you can queue up over time, but the system itself will only actively process up to 60 guest VMs simultaneously. Definitely keep this number in your back pocket for capacity planning questions. All right, let's synthesize all this. Section 4, Key Facts to Memorize. If you only take away a single mental checklist from this entire explainer, make it these 4 constraints, because they represent the highest probability test questions on this topic. Number 1, to Od-Cclm a vTPM VM, you must have AOS 6.8 and PIC 2024.1 or higher. Number 2, the system supports a maximum of 60 parallel VM migrations. Number 3, Od-Cclm is supported strictly on IPAM-enabled VPC overlay networks. Absolutely no VLANs. And number 4, your source and target storage container names must be completely identical. If you can confidently recite these 4 bullet points, you are in phenomenal shape. Before we officially sign off, I want to leave you with one final, provocative exam scenario to chew on. Imagine you've just nailed a planned DR cross-cluster live migration using a synchronous replication schedule. The VMs are purring along happily on the recovery site. You're just about to pull the plug and shut down that original primary cluster for maintenance. What critical, manual step do you have to take first regarding your sync replication schedule so your newly migrated VMs don't attempt to restretch back to the offline primary and completely freeze up? It's operational realities just like this that bridge the gap between simply passing a test and truly mastering the infrastructure. Think about it, check the DR guide, and best of luck with your studying.